we're just like brands, right? Like not every brand is for everyone. We all want to be successful, however we define success. My success is so much dependent upon other people. I always believe that feedback is a gift. And so here I was as an associate brand manager being told I'd never become a manager, never mind a director. The leaders have ups and downs. We all have failures.
People don't realize there are some things that they can work on.
I feel like my contributions matter. I am the first woman of color who was appointed to this role. What does it mean for others who follow me if I don't succeed? What does it mean if I fail?
There are some conversations that need to happen. There are some thoughts that need to change. Join me for the interview with Mita Mallick, where I learn a lot about support, self-confidence, and importance of inclusion. Mita wants no one to experience the workplace as she experienced when she started. She wants a world of work to be different. This is her mission, and I would love to share her story with you guys. Thank you and enjoy the episode. A lot of women executives in my organization who were recently appointed to a leadership role, going through this certain period in their career, let's call it like a leadership identification period, right? And, me being a man who grew up with a self-confidence and do what it takes mindset, sometimes I cannot relate to what they're going through with regards to, being a new leader and trying themselves in a new role. So, going back to your career and, your personal story, I wanted to, I thought you could help me to understand them better, right? So that what you went through, so I can support them and relate to them more.
That's an amazing question. Thank you for asking that, Michael. Part of it starts with diversity of representation. And when I am the lonely only and continue to be in rooms, when they're not people who are from my community, there's not enough diversity of representation in terms of all dimensions of diversity sitting at the table. I personally will feel a bigger burden, right? I am the first woman of color who was appointed to this role. What does it mean for others who follow me if I don't succeed? What does it mean if I fail? Will they be less likely to hire another woman of color after? But if I was a white man, would that be similar? Right? So think about, for anyone listening, leaders have ups and downs. We all have failures. But if you had a white man running a big division and he failed for all the reasons that might have happened and he moves on, are you less likely to hire a white man to backfill? Right. And so that's the burden, I think, I'll speak for myself, that I've felt throughout my career. So there's that piece and the lack of confidence sometimes that others instill in me. Sometimes I've walked into places feeling very confident, but then all of a sudden I look around, I'm the only one who looks like me. I might be the only woman, I might be the only person of color. And so that burden, it starts to chip away at my sense of self. And also if they're not people who are supportive in the room of me, there's that piece. And then I'll bring in the cultural element, which is I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, born and raised in the US with my younger brother. Culturally, I was raised to, my father used to always say, keep your head down, work hard, stay out of trouble, you'll be recognized. Being humble, not sharing the spotlight, and always being in service of others, hospitality. And so how does that show up in corporate America? Right. It's really difficult because I have to, that doesn't show up well in a US corporate environment, not at all. And so those are the things I would have you think about when you think about women leaders who are in leadership roles and what they might be going through. And it is, I hope that someday we don't have to even use that label to say women versus men, that we're just leaders. But the reality is there's not enough women in leadership positions today.
It's interesting, some of the fears that you just described to me, they are not kind of spoken, or they were not, it's something that it's very I feel like personal to you. And do you think that sometimes some of those fears are something like that, these are your fears that sort of like you kind of, I just put those fears in front of you and then you just need to kind of go and work through them, but they're not the case, with regards to all people in the room?
So there's a Taylor Swift song right now that my daughter's obsessed with, my 8-year-old. It's called Antihero. And there's a line in the song I keep thinking about. It's called, "Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me." And I felt that way for a lot of my career. Hi, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me. It's my fears. It's my inner critic. It's my lack of ability to believe in myself. I believe all those things were true in my career, but I'm also entering a workplace that was not designed for someone who looks like me. Right. And so those are the two things. Like, I think that's important for me to acknowledge that I've discovered in my career. There are things that I have done that haven't served me well because of my upbringing, because of places I was in where I wasn't welcome, where I didn't feel like I belonged. But then there are also systems and processes that weren't met for people who look like me. And so those two things really clash and collide.
What did help you to overcome these things, these fears? Who helped you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of my first jobs out of getting my MBA from Duke University, I was so excited. I wanted to go into marketing and storytelling. I'm working at this big brand name organization, and I think it's like the moment. Like, I just love it. I'm killing it. I'm doing well. And I'll never forget my manager at the time. He's wearing an ugly Hawaiian print t-shirt. And yes, I will say it was ugly. I'm sitting in my cubicle working. He pulls me aside one afternoon into an empty conference room, and he says to me, "We just came out of talent review, and I need to tell you that no one knows what you do here. You're a wallflower. You don't speak up in meetings. No one knows what you're working on, and you're not going to be a manager, never mind a director." And why that was important was because at the time, this company was hiring talent based on how far they thought you could rise in the organization. And so here I was as an associate brand manager being told I'd never become a manager, never mind a director, in a very unkind way that he delivered the feedback. But you know what, Michael? He was right in many ways. And after I went home and downed my pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, I felt sorry for myself. I wanted to lead teams, but I was much more an introverted, quiet leader. And so I had to think about, as I was showing up in workspaces, how I could contribute my voice, how I could make impact, how I could lead teams. Because I will tell you, when you walk into a 50-person conference room and you get to a meeting early, I'd be sitting on the radiator. I'd be sitting in the back corner, even if there were chairs, because I was just so afraid of like what people would think of me. Am I saying the wrong thing? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? Am I like all of those things? But I will tell you, it has taken me so long to just practice using the sound of my voice. Like, my husband will tell you, he'll hear me like practicing an empty living room, in the shower, driving in the car, just practicing, preparing talking points or preparing to show up to a meeting. And so it's been a really long journey for me to find my voice in my workplaces.
So you say like repetition. So you identified for yourself some areas of, let's say, self-improvement, right? Or something that would help you to develop self-confidence. Let's say the way you present yourself, the way you talk, the information that you kind of prepare for that, right? And then the practice helped you to kind of to create that self-confidence because you practice, you're doing that, you know that you can do that. So it kind of helped you to then deliver, right?
Absolutely. Even to this day, I always show up to meetings first, whether it's in a live room or if it's on Zoom or virtual. If I'm there physically, I always sit at the table. I get there early to get comfortable and do, the banter, the chit chat with people ahead of time. If I am presenting, I will have prepared and practiced my talk to an empty room. If I am going as a participant or as an influencer, I will make sure that I have read the materials of what you may have sent, and so that I can prepare and be the first to ask a question. That was the other trick I learned and taught myself, is that if I could speak up first, when someone's presenting in a meeting, Michael, let's say we're in a meeting, you've presented a proposal, and then there's like the quiet moment because everyone's digesting, and Michael says, "Okay, let's talk about the proposal. Any questions?" I'll be the first one. Raise your, because once you get it, then the confidence builds. When I was more junior, I'd have a buddy. Let's say you and I were both associates together. I would say, "Michael, I want to ask this question in our quarterly sales meeting, like, kick me under the chair, push me, make sure I ask the question." But I'm not an athlete. I can run very fast. I'm not coordinated. But you look at great athletes and there's skill, but there's also like honing the skill and practicing. And that's exactly I was not born a natural orator. I had to practice, right? And now I'm at a place where I'm privileged and lucky, and I've earned it. I get to be invited on podcasts, and this I find another way of practicing storytelling and practicing using my voice.
So on that meeting that you just mentioned, the body would just first to say, hey, we just discussed this with Mita over here. She has so many good thoughts. Mita, can you share those thoughts with the company over here, right? So she was kind of, he or she was kind of
or
calling you out.
Me under the chair and be like, the president's asking for questions, raise your hand. Or that's a wonderful way for somebody to speak up and say, we were just chatting about this. Mita, here's what we were talking about. Mita, do you have anything else to add? And pass the microphone to me or invite me to contribute.
It's interesting. We talk about not being self-confident, but then for me, it feels like it's a being self-cautious in a way that you knew that there's something that you can work on to be better, and you just kind of hone that skill or hone that, in a way. Obviously, it's it's not about the, it's very, what I'm noticing right now very often with folks is, there's not enough self-confidence, not self-confidence, cautiousness in a way that if people don't realize there are some things that they can work on, right? And I think that people like yourself or me, for example, I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know, right? But if I don't know what I don't know, I'm trying to put my absolute best to get there, right? And it's not given. It's a hard work that needs to be done over there. And I think that the earlier you can get this, the better for your career, right?
Absolutely. And I think early on in my career, I thought it was a 50-50 equation. Maybe it was that 50% of my career growth and development was on the company, and I own the other 50%. The more senior you become, that changes very quickly. Maybe right now it's for me 70-30, meaning 70% of the ownership is on me, 30% of the company. But I do think, and I will say, I have worked in a number of places and spaces which were not the right fit. I did not feel like I was belonged. I did not get the opportunities I had earned. And at the same time, I had to work on myself as a leader and how I was showing up. And I do think a lot of the ways in which I was raised culturally and my upbringing didn't serve me well in corporate America. Not at all.
About the place to belong. So here's an argument for you. Do you think that every place should be built in a way that everyone can belong to that place, or there should be different places where there are different people that belong to those places? Which one is better for generally society and generally for the person, right? Because when you mentioned you didn't belong to organization, and I also felt like there's some organization that I work for that I didn't belong. But then the question is, did those organizations, or should those organizations change, or I should just find another organization that I can belong to?
That's a great question. I think first there could be a mismatch in terms of talent, expertise. So I likely could become a CFO. I think you can upskill yourself in anything in life, but I wouldn't enjoy it. And so if I start a career in finance right now and I'm not enjoying the work, that's part of belonging. There's so many words out there, Michael, right now: diversity, inclusion, equity, justice, belonging. And for me, what I talk about in my new book, which I know we'll discuss, Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace, I talk about what is inclusion. Inclusion is, I feel seen, recognized, and valued at work. I feel like my contributions matter. So when I work for you in your organization, you make me feel that. I wouldn't say every single day, but on the balance and the whole, because inclusion is the biggest retention tool leaders have right now. Because if I feel included in your organization, Michael, if someone else comes and offers me another $20,000, $30,000, I'm not very likely to leave, maybe for $100K, but I will think about it, because that feeling of feeling like this is my place, I am helping the company unlock its potential, and I am also unlocking my potential. There's no better feeling than that. If you can go back through your career, and I have moments where I was like, if I could go back to that moment, like that was so special. And so I do feel like leaders have that responsibility to untap the potential in their employees. And if I don't feel comfortable showing up on screen, showing up to work, if I am worried about everyday aggressions or the emotional labor and tax that women often face in workplaces, how am I even going to focus on the work?
Yeah.
I'm too busy focused on other stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't feel comfortable being there.
All right. Now, here's one other argument that I wanted to bounce off you here. So when I started out, I worked for this company, and that was a kind of a tough company to work for. I mean, I worked my ass off. I showed up early. I closed up the office, and every time I talked to my manager, and I was in sales, I was like, Michael, either you do this KPI or you're fired. And I had the notion that either it's a kind of a survivor game. So I need to get through that. But there was something in me that I didn't want to give up. As if I knew that I could succeed with it, and this is just the process for me to be better. But then when my younger brother, after the college, was looking for the job, and we were talking about them, I didn't want him to work with me. I thought that that's not a good company for you. I don't want you to be with me. I'll go and work with my best friend. But then I didn't want to drop the ball. I didn't want to leave that, right? Because in my understanding, that was the place that, although there was a struggle or hard work for me and maybe I wasn't appreciated, but I could do something for myself because I can kind of, hungry. Obviously, it's not something, that's not the vibe that I wanted to show other, because I was different, but that was the certain environment that I felt that I need to go through. So so now when I'm building my company and I'm creating the environment that everyone is supported, that everyone is here, that there's always that people are comfortable in on the platform, right? But sometimes I feel that this comfort zone that people have made them, I wouldn't say they don't want to move on, but they don't want to grow in the same speed or phase that I wanted to grow, right? As if there's a lot of things that created for them. So the question for you is there a certain balance? Or do you think that the manager that gave you the hard feedback helped you to get to where you are right now? Or all of the people that didn't support you, made you who you are right now?
Yeah. I think, listen, I've had a lot of great leaders and a lot of not so great leaders I've worked for. I am grateful for that manager sharing the feedback that he did, but it was not done with any sort of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
I still believe kindness and empathy are the number one thing leaders are lacking today. And ruling with fear will only get you so far. I left that job very shortly after that because I was a manager who ruled with fear. And every day I showed up scared. Who wants to show up to work scared? I want to make impact. I want to grow. And so I think you raise an interesting question. There's two sides of it, right? I think that when you think about fear, there's this side. There's probably, if anyone's seen the famous movie Devil Wears Prada, right? There's images you have of what it means for a boss to rule with fear at work. And on the other hand, there is a boss who is, anytime you think of kindness, people think pushover, lazy, lets people get away with things, nobody's working. And it doesn't have to be that way. I can still be very kind and firm. I can still motivate my team. I can still get the best out of them. I can still have expectations from them. I just don't have to do it from a place of fear. And what has happened throughout my career is anytime someone is ruled with fear, I always believe that feedback is a gift. There's something you can learn from it, especially if you've quietly heard the same things over and over again. There's probably self-awareness, but I'm not going to stay. I go back throughout my career, Michael, and I think about all those times those leaders led with fear. I didn't stay long.
There's one example of building company culture where, so one of the other companies that I would kind of work for before I started my company, the CEO of the company was a jackass. So he opened up office with his leg, basically just shouting out, giving shit to people, etc., right? And he was very rude, and no one in the company hated him. But he was doing this only once every few months or once in a month, and no one knew and talked to him. So, but then when I talk to everyone in the team, I say, hey guys, why are you still working here? Why are you still beating the ass? They always say, hey, we like the team. Team is great. We like the pay, we like the clients, right? And so what happened was the company culture was built as a certain, I would say like an opposite, or like a sort of like a rebellion against the CEO. So like, so they are kind of grouping together to survive through the bad CEO, like a certain like monster.
Yes.
And the guy knew that. He knew that this is the approach, and he was, happily living in some islands, making money, etc. So it worked for him. Obviously, it's not natural for me, or probably for you, to have that company culture, but it works, right? So I think that, what's happening but then if it's not for him, for being that person, maybe people were not as happy as they were working, because they didn't see the sort of like the different in terms of what is it that they like or what they don't, right? So the question for you, do you think that companies like this, or the bosses list, should exist in this environment for some people?
I worked for a boss who, I will say, the devil did not wear Prada. She wore Chanel, and she wore a lot of it. And exactly what you described, except she constantly ruled with fear. And what was interesting about that time period of my life, Michael, I ended up working under her for 13, 14 months. We all bonded together. There was safety in numbers, and there was trauma that we were experiencing working for her. So we all became very, very close. I'm still friends with many of the people from that time years ago. But eventually, she lost the entire team. And we did. We stayed for longer because we bonded and we enjoyed each other. And we knew that in spite of her, we could still make progress for the company. But that whole team of a dozen people, within that year and a half, the entire team turned around. No one was left.
So let's agree on that. So for the business, obviously that's not the best approach, but that for the team, for the people that you bonded up, maybe without her being that kind of boss, we were not bonded as you were, right?
But exactly. And I think what you're also getting at is you're going to drive short-term results.
Right.
But you won't drive long-term results, because what is the cost to replace all those employees who left? Attract talent, onboard them. And so we absolutely, because she ruled from fear, we did drive results. We were a great team, but we didn't stay. It was short-term. It was short-term impact that she got out of us.
The example that I gave also, they didn't build the core team, right? You can build an asset in a way that can produce, but you cannot build the core team, the people that are, they are champions for the company, right? So they will actually consider that this is their company, this is their project, and they wanted to fight for it and live for it, right? And not just necessarily work for you, right? One of the things that I always led by example, or told my guys, that in our organization, we don't have employees, because no one is working for no one. This is our all company, and we all are, getting compensated for the amount of the work that we're doing. And it's not about a manager or employee or who is working for. It's about just, having certain areas of responsibilities and the team, and then combine of us kind of working towards a certain goal, right? And because of that, it provide people with certain ownership into their life, into what they're doing and how they're doing that, and commitment and responsibility. And these are the much more valuable and, effective characteristics than the fear, right? That so many companies have. Absolutely. Can we talk for a second about the fears that you've seen very common for new leaders, or for women leaders, that are on the surface and that are addressable? You mentioned several that were distinctly yours, right? But you obviously talk to a lot of female founders, leaders, and just in your network. For the audience that's listening to this, are there some fears that they might relate to that we can kind of call out right now, and then maybe just discuss quickly how they can be addressed with some practical tips for people to start incorporating?
Well, first, I would say that I earned this seat. This was not a favor. I'm not a diversity hire. I earned this seat. And so I think there's the piece of respect that I have earned this seat. I walk into the C-suite meeting. I'm part of the C-suite. Respect that. So I think that what can start to happen has happened for me. You are in these rooms when you're the lonely only. You are talked over, you're dismissed, you're interrupted, your ideas are stolen. You wonder why you're even sitting there. hasn't happened to me all the time. I also want to be clear and say I've worked in wonderful organizations with supportive teams, but there have been moments in my career where it's because I don't look like the majority, I am immediately dismissed. And so one of the things I ask leaders to think about is, in that case, it's not the job of the CEO. It's also the job of the entire C-suite. If I've just been appointed as chief marketing officer and I am the only woman and only woman of color in the room, I'm going to ask my peers to that audience, I'm going to say, what's your responsibility to help and support me? If you see me constantly being interrupted or dismissed, or I'm being taken off the agenda, or people don't allow me to present or speak, like, what are you going to do about it? We're all an ally for somebody. I fundamentally believe this. We spend too much time at work not to be caring about how we're building our cultures. And so we all have to look out and protect each other. So I don't want the burden to constantly be on me. Of course I've done it. I've advocated for myself. I've spoken up. But wouldn't it be great if someone else actually noticed that I was being sidelined? And so that's what I want people to think about. Like, whose career are you looking after other than your own? Whose career are you looking after other than your own? Because, of course, we all want to be making impact. We all want to be successful, however we define success. But I would like to pose the question, like, who else are you looking out for? And it doesn't have to be your direct report. It can be a peer, right?
Yeah.
So I think we put too much focus sometimes on, and as we should, on like the CEO, the leader, the manager, right? But if we're peers on a leadership team, we can be looking out for each other. There's no reason why we can't.
One of the challenges that my HR team was facing was the fact that there is a communication and there is a work between the sort of like the manager and the reportee, or right? Or sort of like if you are a CEO, then you work with the C-suite, but then, as you just pointed out, there is no work between peers, or there's not enough communication.
Yeah.
Right? Very often we're missing that because we're going from a, hey, I'm working with these guys, we have a project, I'm running the project or a certain task, etc. But then, as you just pointed out, it is important for peers to not just work together, but also look out for each other, right? And then support each other in terms of, looking out for their career and supporting them in proactively, not just reactively, right? And this is what even we as organization, considering the fact that we were very, company culture oriented and cautious, we made that mistake when we were scaling up, just because of a lot of operational matters that we had and meetings and etc. Right? It's interesting.
So it is, I'll go back to that leadership example. It is the CEO's job to be watching the dynamics of their C-suite. It's also the job of all those executives to be looking out for each other. I think particularly as you grow in your career, Michael, my success is so much dependent upon other people. Like it's no longer as me as an individual contributor, especially as you get to an executive role. I can only be as successful as those around me because we're working towards a shared goal. So if I have been put into the CMO role and you're the chief technology officer and you see me being sidelined and dismissed, it's affecting the whole team and the whole organization. It's in your best interest to make sure that I've been brought in for my talent and expertise and that I'm going to be set up for success to win, because when I win, we're all going to win. We'll all win.
That's a great point, looking at the inclusion like that, right? So that everyone is included with regards to their position or their responsibility, or who they are as people, and just helping to look out for each other. Although it's not potentially should be your job on a day-to-day basis, but the success factor of your job depends on everyone, right? That's the same organization. Yeah, that's so true. So I have some block of questions about self-confidence that I definitely wanted to talk with you about, because you wrote some really powerful articles on the topic. So I wanted to kind of, to sit on a few questions there. But before I do that, one other question that I wanted to ask just you, all right? So here's the question. So I was always I read the article about working mothers, right? And about people being biased about them, right? About the different notions of things, right? And I'll be honest with you, I was brought up in a certain notion that in a job, both men and women are equal, and one can require the same amount of dedication, resourcefulness, and then stress resilient, which sometimes we all know is out there when you build a startup, right? However, just a few months ago, I watched this podcast, the Diaries of CEO, with Dr. Mindy Pelz. I'm not sure what you know, and she spoke about the certain biological difference in both sex and how the workspace should adapt to support women, for example, right? And I was wondering, do you agree with Mindy Pelz in terms of should the workspace be, shaped or adapted or different? If when we talk about, women leaders or working mothers, and then you experience both of those. Were there some instances or some examples of companies that have a certain additional policies, or because I started thinking about this and I didn't think about this before, right? So I'm not sure whether thinking about this and working towards, shaping or adapting or considering the fact what women are going through, and that is the right approach, or I'm kind of it's not the way you do that, and then equality and inclusion is actually, creating the environment for everyone and not necessarily adapting or shaping.
Well, I fundamentally believe the world of work for women can't change without men. It's the world of work for all of us. And not all women will become mothers or caregivers, nor do they want to be. So it's a dangerous and slippery slope, right? So yes, we have to change physically our workplaces. For example, I have had 2 children. My children are now 10 and 8. I have nursed them. And so for me, it's important the workplace I was in had an opportunity for me to have mother's rooms. So I could, provide milk for my children. And so those are things that you'll see more and more. Like when you talk about the biological and physical differences, if you were a birthing mother and if you choose to breastfeed and you come back to the workplace and you are at work, you need a private space to do that, right? I fundamentally believe that every single workplace should have a mother's room, especially if you want to attract and retain talent, and knowing that all women will not become mothers, right? They won't. And so that's where I think it's really important. I also think when we think about parental leave, right? Many companies still call it maternity leave. It's parental leave. And when you can create it equal for all parents, regardless of however your family came to be, then there's going to be more equity created at home and in the workplace, which is what we're lacking, right? The conversation often is about women and mothers. I have myself experienced the motherhood penalty, right? I had never thought to myself, I always thought in the balance of my life, Michael, I'm going to be a great leader, great mother, great wife, great cousin, sister, all those things, friend, right?
Right.
But I never anticipated how my organizations and workplaces would view me differently once I became a mother. And my husband, for him, the fatherhood premium has paid out. I mean, this is statistically shown. I talk about it in Reimagine Inclusion, where for every child we've had, he is seen as more stable, more committed, more ambitious. He will make more money. And I am a disheveled mess. I'm a disheveled mess. I'm less committed, right? It's all the biases that we have because many of them start from our home. Like, what's the role? How are you raised to view women versus men, right? And so we bring that, whether we realize it or not, we bring that with us to work.
So your advice for me would be, my workspace should adapt or should sort of embrace the difference, but at the same time, the culture within the organization shouldn't have a notion that either a woman has kids, or so there shouldn't be any bias with regards to a gender or a sex or a role, rather than just kind of embracing the difference and then supporting those differences, either or, because I'm sure that
a lot of male founders or just executives or leaders also have a certain, needs, right, that are a bit different. So let me give an example. Like, when you are in a very stress high roll all the time,
Yes.
right, you need some time off to recharge the batteries and do some weird shit like archery or some mountain climbing or something that you just kind of need to get that energy off. And if you don't do that, then you become very toxic, right? And you also need to, but without having that sort of like internal, like, I wouldn't say like internal emotion of like drive that usually have that hunger, right? You cannot sometimes succeed, right? Because you need to have that pressure on all the time, right?
No, absolutely. And I think it goes back to understanding lived experiences that aren't your own. Years ago, I worked for a company where they had new buildings we were creating and they had designed mother's rooms. And I thought to myself, who designed these mother's rooms? They don't make sense.
Yeah.
In terms of having been someone who has breastfed, and I understand the experience of that. Now, that's not everyone's experience, but I have some understanding, and I found out, it was men architects who had designed the room.
Right.
And I said, well, have any of these men ever breastfed? Because if they haven't, they wouldn't understand. So that's part of it too, is like, sometimes we can be pretty arrogant in thinking we know everything.
Right.
So to ask the question, to say, I actually want to do this, but I don't know how to do this because it's not my experience.
Right.
And so I'd like to support the women in my workplace, but I don't know. And so the question is, have you talked to the women? Because I always say,
that's great.
Our employees are sometimes our forgotten consumers, right? Yeah. We're so busy selling how much, who to, why, when, externally. We forget to ask the people that are the most important, what's your experience like working here? What could we be doing better, right? And how can I be better supporting you? And just asking those questions. Often the employees have the answers. You just haven't listened to them yet.
Yeah, that's a very good point about, asking questions, expressing your desire to wanted to support or help someone, right?
Absolutely.
And which obviously I agree with you with our current fast pace. We just kind of miss that just because we have so many things going on at the same time. Don't stop.
Yes.
Going on. In one of your articles, you talk about getting comfortable saying no and why it's important to your self-confidence. Can you explain to me what do you mean by comfortable saying no, and how did it help, and just generally talk to people that don't usually say no that often, and how it helped you.
Michael, I'm so impressed all these articles of mine that you've read that you're bringing up. I was like, yes, I did write that article. I forgot about that one. I was raised a people pleaser. We talked about this. I was always raised to put other people's comfort in front of mine. And so I was not taught to say no. And part of it was I was taught to work hard and not smart. I can outwork you. Maybe, I don't know. But like I have like a really strong work ethic that I'm incredibly proud of. But the downside is you don't say no. You keep taking on more and more. You don't know when to say, quit things, quit projects, peoples and spaces and places. So to anyone listening right now, it's a tough market. And so layoffs continue, tech keeps resizing, readjusting. You have got to look up and make sure that you are working on the things that are the top 3 to 5 priorities for the company. So forget the special project you're working on the side, say no and quit it, right? And it's easy for me. Someone listening is like, oh, Mita, it's easy for you to say no. It's not easy to say no to your boss, but it's the way in which I might say to you, Michael, you've asked me to take on these 3 things. I want to revisit the priorities. Actually, last quarter, we said these were the 5 priorities. So if they adjusted, did I misunderstand something? So it's not that I'm saying I'm not going to work. I just have to have that conversation to say, am I working on the things that are high value and high impact for the company? Because in this market, things are changing very quickly. And if you are just sitting there working, and not looking up to say, oh my God, I've been working on the wrong things, you might find yourself perhaps having to move on from that company. Or you might be disappointed in a low performance review, or you didn't get a promotion. And it's like, oh my God, I wasn't working on the right things and I wasn't prioritizing. And every time, Michael, I think if I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. We only have so much capacity, and your quality is going to go down. It's like, yeah, quantity. I can say I was working on 25 things. Did I do any of them well? And so that's the other thing that I think about a lot now, that I am letting someone down. If I have committed to you, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to let you down if I say yes to 5 other things.
It's interesting because it's not just about saying no to a new project, like it's like, hey, I don't have capacity for that, but also saying no to people, or saying no to things that affects you and your life and your performance, especially as the new leader, right? Because I've seen so many times that the new team leaders or head of departments, they cannot say no to low performers or people. They are staying within the, so like a good example, one of my recently promoted team leaders on the account management team, she worked with several account managers and they were not as dedicated or performing well, and she was always couldn't say no to him, so she was working on giving the feedback, helping them out, sort of like, because she had responsibility for the team to produce. But then what the more seasoned leader gonna do, we're gonna analyze, give the feedback, give time frame, but then if the person is not changing or adapting to this, you just say no, right? And having that realization that you can say no to a person.
Yes. I think that there's nothing, I always think about these moments in my career where I was doing well in my role, and there's nothing that will demotivate me faster other than micromanaging, but leaders putting up with poor performers. And I want to be clear, because sometimes people are mislabeled poor performers. I've certainly been mislabeled, but they're just not a fit in terms of their expertise and their experience. They haven't been onboarded properly. They haven't been upskilled. It's just not going to work out. And I watch leaders, and this is where we have different standards for different people. You're like, how much more are you going to pour into Mita? Like, help her find what she's meant to do next. And it's also the say no. Sometimes you have to move on and say, I know Mita's talented, but she's just not talented for this role. I'm going to help her find something within the organization, or I'm going to have that honest adult conversation with her and say, you don't seem happy. This doesn't seem to be working out. What do you want to do? Because I want to help you get to what you're meant to do next, because it's just not right now for this team. It's not the right fit at the moment.
Yeah. But the fear of not saying no, doesn't open up the conversation, right? So you just don't start that conversation because you fear that, person is still, dedicated to this or still wants this. But sometimes maybe their priorities change, or they're not in the right place, so they can so just opening that conversation, saying no, this is the right time, is the way to go. All right, I have one other thing. Last time we spoke briefly, you touched based on finding your voice and how was that important for you about finding your voice, right? Can you describe to me your kind of journey on finding your voice and why that was important for you, and then why, and what do we mean by finding your voice, and and just generally how one might identify whether I have my voice or not?
We're all born with a voice,
right?
Most of us, but it's finding the voice and reclaiming it. Because I've found in periods of my life where I have been working for non-supportive leaders, where I've been working for bullies, where I've been working for coworkers who didn't have my back or didn't trust me, or I didn't trust them, your voice goes up and down, right? And for me, finding my voice was like the physical, but also the written. Because one of the things I love about LinkedIn, which is how we met, is I love the written form. And I'm quite good at it. It's my superpower. I'd prefer to write all day than to speak, to be honest, right? Everyone has their thing, but I love writing. And so that's also the journey to find my voice and to write my book, is there are ups and downs in that. And I do think when I have allowed people to dismiss me, minimize, gaslight me, bully me in my career, I have diminished myself. I've taken a step back. I feel like I'm not worthy. My ideas aren't good enough. And I'm unsure about if what I have to contribute matters, because people have told me time and time again it doesn't matter. And so that's the journey to find it. And I think there's ups and downs. I think you find it and you lose it. I talk about when I lost my dad suddenly, and back in 2017, there's nothing like grief to shatter your confidence. And Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in Option B in the book she wrote with Adam Grant when she lost her husband. Like grief, like our stories are constantly being rewritten. And so just because I have my voice today with you doesn't mean that in a few weeks I might not have it for whatever reason. I might have to find it again. And so I think it ebbs and flows in our life.
I always, when I have a guest on, I always recording as this is the last interview that I would give or take, that this is it. So, and that's why it should, encompassate everything that the two people have within that connection, etc. Talking about the, finding your voice, I was very, when researching questions for the interview, a few things stood out for me. One of them was like the storytelling and then the art of storytelling, and that you were very passionate about the storytelling. And I have the feeling that the storytelling helped you to find your voice.
Absolutely.
Because with stories, you can add emotion to a story. So usually why we like stories and not like some facts, because in the story we can have a character and we can have some emotions and we can relate and we can kind of live through this story, right? And it's interesting because now it makes sense for me. Sometimes when I don't think that a lot of people working on their stories and don't see things as their story, right? So they as if you start working on your story and then just kind of treating your life as a certain story and then looking at the character, etc., that might help you to kind of to find that voice. Do you agree with me or not?
Absolutely. Stories have the power to heal. I'll be honest, a lot of my storytelling has been selfish. I've wanted to share things because writing helps me heal. And then I thought to myself, wow, I'm writing and people are resonating and it's building community and conversation because it's helping other people heal. All of a sudden, all these things I've been through in my life, I experienced them alone or thought I did, but other people are saying to me, oh, wow, the same thing happened to me. And that really resonates. And then stories can help inspire change. And that's why you do this podcast as well. Like everyone likes to hear a good story and also likes to see themselves reflected in it. And as my days as a marketer, I always think about when you're trying to convince people in business, you have the hard numbers, but a good story is what's going to get people on your side to say yes to the recommendation, to say yes to more money, right? Because you can always have the slide and the facts and figures. This is what we should do. Okay, well, let me tell you the story behind it. And you're like, oh, you have a captive audience. And why does it matter? It's the oldest form of communication in human civilization, right?
Yeah.
Storytelling.
Yeah. And it's interesting when we talk about stories, they should be personal, right? And I think that the fact that you kind of opened up and you start sharing your personal stories and living through them helps a lot to, first off, to have people to reciprocate and sort of like relate and support, right? Because very often what I've seen in the corporate world or even like in sales, and I've talked to so many people, I'm going to have a few guests as well, about adding your personal self in your story, in your business life would actually enhance, the perception of the world and you can be more successful. So a lot of people, they just don't open up. They don't want to feel their story. And even talking about the podcast, like I've seen so many interviews of you, and every time you always add some personal self into this, and it shapes up the whole kind of end product, and it's like you understand the story. But I see so many podcasts, and I've done that a few seasons that I don't want to go back to, that they're very technical, they don't have a story, they don't have personal me, because I thought that it's not the right place, it's not the right platform, I shouldn't do that. People won't understand me. It's not business. It's not personal. I'm not sure whether...
The world has changed.
Yeah.
The world has changed. And I think I will tell you I have a certain level of privilege and power. I know that. And with privilege and power becomes responsibility. So now I am telling stories that maybe I wouldn't have told when I first started my career because I was afraid of blowback, retribution, what people might think of me. But now I think, gosh, I only have one life to live. And if I can inspire other people to show up and, whether we think about it or not, we're just like brands, right? Like not every brand is for everyone, but like, as you think about your leadership profile, how do you stand out from other people? You don't have to share everything, but if you can share one or two personal things, that's what people are going to remember. Go back to some of the most memorable moments you've had in your career. People don't remember the facts and figures. If they remember it, they remember the story that was shared in the room. They remember the story.
Let's move on to the book that is coming out very soon.
Yes, it is.
I pre-ordered.
Thank you very much.
I'm expecting it, I think, October-ish.
October
right?
3rd, yes.
October 3rd. Awesome. So can you talk to me about the book? Why you decided to write it, and just generally, what is it about? And also, I didn't ask this question, but we might touch base on this right now. What is your mission, Mita? And is the book about your mission or not?
The book is 100% about my mission in life. The book is Reimagine Inclusion, Debunking 13 Myths to Transform Your Workplace. I wanted to say all the quiet parts out loud of what holds us back from making meaningful progress. There's a lot of great books on diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership, but I wanted to bring a different perspective and point of view, talk about these myths and stories we tell ourselves and how we can debunk them, show up, and do better, be better. My mission is I don't want anyone to experience the workplace I experienced when I first started. I don't want any of our children. I don't want my children. I don't want any of our children to experience that. I want the world of work to be different. And so that is my singular mission. And I think by shining a light on things that we normally don't talk about, or thinking about things from a different perspective, that's how we're going to show up and do better and be better at work.
Mm-hmm. Did you have people in your life that helped you to kind of work, or kind of help you to build that mission in you, or help you to support throughout you building the mission and kind of being an example of you? Or I'm trying to understand you with regards to, it's a very strong mission, and I understand how you kind of ended up working on that mission and why the mission is so important to you, right? But it's interesting when you mentioned there are some, books out there, or there are some concepts out there about that, but you still decided to kind of branch out and create your own unique voice because you realize that there is a need out there and you want that, right?
Well, my parents, my brother, my husband, my whole family has been supportive in my work. But also, Michael, it's not just me. It takes all of us. Like, my book is one of many that are going to help inspire change, right? And I know that. So I'm contributing my voice, right? It's not just all of a sudden me alone. I can't do it alone. And I know that there's so many other wonderful thought leaders, individuals with expertise internally, externally, outside of organizations who are doing this work. It will take all of us. And so I'm very, very aware of that it's not just me that's going to come out with this amazing book, which it is, but it's not. It'll take all of us to change the way we work.
It's interesting when I read the description, and it said that it's about understanding the leader's journey in the organization and also transforming organizational system, processes, policies, et cetera, et cetera. And, I first reading the title of the book and then the description, now I realize, I was like, okay, now it makes sense, right? Because from the title, I didn't realize that, we are talking about the leadership in general and the organizations and the systems, the process of shaping those. And this is nice.
Well, I picked 13 myths back to storytelling. They all open with really good stories. One of the myths is, I'm all for diverse talent as long as they're good. Our ad wasn't racist. It was simply a mistake. Why are you asking for a raise? Your husband makes more than enough money. Yeah. And so I purposely picked titles that were, wow, clickbait, some might say, or I've never heard that before, or I have, and I can't believe she put it in writing. Because the point was to open with a powerful story I had seen at some point in my career and try to debunk why that's not true. And a lot of times, as I said in the beginning of our conversation as we come full circle, is that there's individual, there's me, Mita, how I show up at work, and there's the systems and processes. And sometimes there are good systems and processes set up, but I as an individual will undermine the whole thing. And sometimes they're not good systems and processes, but it takes both. It's not one or the other. It takes both.
I think it's a good point to wrap up and kind of close up for this discussion. All right.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Mita, for also taking the time and, for being inspiration. I had some questions that I didn't ask, and specifically because now I better understand you and understand your position and where you're coming from. And I realized that some of the questions don't need the answers, because you are the answer to those questions with regards to, who you are and what you do. So I appreciate you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.